Hi, I'm Keith from Volkswagen Cape Town. Today we are going to concentrate on showing you internal organs of our cars that we as clients don't typically see, the critical clearances that they have and how very important it is that these items are correctly machined, correctly measured. And so today we'll show you what these items look like, what they are, and what equipment we use to measure them. This here is a typical 4-cylinder inline diesel engine, which we will use for demonstration purposes, for measuring ovality. This is the piston for this engine and the connecting rod, and this here is the crankshaft for this engine. The measuring components is the main bearing, the big end journal, the skirt of the piston. This is the clearance between the big end journal and the big end itself. And over here we'll measure for ovality and for taper along the length of the cylinder bore. This here is an internal telescopic gauge. There are various sizes for measuring various size bores or areas like this. And then in conjunction with the internal telescopic gauge, we will use a micrometer to measure the outside measurements of the internal telescopic gauges. I'm going to show how ovality is measured. This cylinder needs to be perfectly round and perfectly straight, top to bottom. And the way we measure that is with our internal telescopic gauge. And we'll demonstrate just by using this one. We measure it across like this and across like this. And then we use a micrometer to measure what the measurement is. And ovality is the difference between this measurement and that measurement. Next, we measure taper. Taper is measured from the top, and that measurement taken, and then at the bottom, and that measurement taken, and the difference of that would be taper. There are very small tolerances for differences in the measurement. This here is the piston. The piston fits inside the cylinder bore, and the difference in size is measured in this area to the cylinder bore. It is a specification and is very critical. For instance, this piston to this cylinder bore's clearance is approximately 0.05 of a millimeter on average. So we can see that to maintain that, this cylinder needs to be perfectly round and perfectly straight for this part of the piston to work 100% correct. The next critical measurement for this part of the engine, we've turned the engine block around, and the section we now see exposed is the crankshaft main bearing housings with its bearings in them. Here we have the crankshaft. The crankshaft has been machined to a specific size, and the difference between the main bearing journal and the main bearing housing is also a specification. And various manufacturers have various clearances, but the clearance between the main bearing journal and the crankshaft main bearing journal and the main bearing housing is in the region of 0.04 millimeters. That's, as you can see, the tolerance is very little, but if these measurements are either increased or decreased, we will either prevent the crankshaft from turning freely, or we will end up with too much clearance and loss of oil pressure in the engine. Next, we're going to show how the clearance is measured between the main bearing housing with its bearing, and the main bearing journal on the crankshaft. A telescopic gauge is typically put in there, or a similar tool. That is then measured with a micrometer, which is this one, and a size is obtained in this manner. That specific size is then written down, and the crankshaft journal is then measured in this fashion. And the difference in the two readings is the clearance, which is a specification for this crankshaft. Next, we'll measure the clearance between the begin bearing journal and also the begin bearing housing on the connecting rod with a piston on it. As before, we'll measure this clearance here, or this measurement, with this tool. We'll use this tool to measure what it is, and then measure the begin journal itself on the crankshaft. And the difference of the two readings will be the clearance, which is also a very critical specification, also in the region of 0.04 millimeters. Now that we've established that the clearances on these items, as opposed to this item over here, which is the cylinder block, is 100% correct, when these are assembled correctly, we can be assured of a perfectly running engine that will last for a long time.